The great hall of the Galactic Council buzzed with nervous energy as hundreds of alien representatives shifted in their seats. The emergency meeting had been called with only hours of notice, and the massive display at the center of the room showed why. A massive solar storm, larger than any recorded in the last 1,000 years, was heading straight for the colony world of Haven 2. Council Speaker Thorm, his crystalline form reflecting the red warning lights, stood at the podium. "The situation is dire," he announced, his translator converting his harmonic tones into standard galactic basic. "We have less than 48 hours before the storm hits Haven 2. There are 15,000 colonists there, and their shields will not hold." The display changed to show the colony's defensive systems. They were already starting to fail under the initial waves of radiation. When the main storm hit, they would shatter like glass. "We need immediate volunteers for a rescue mission," Thorm continued. "The Council will provide any resources needed." A warrior from the proud Krell Empire stood up, his scaled armor gleaming. "My people are the greatest warriors in 3 spiral arms. But this," he shook his head, "this is not a battle that can be won. The radiation levels would cook even our strongest ships." One by one, the great warrior races of the galaxy declined. The armor-clad Vex, famous for their suicide charges in the Nebula Wars, declared it impossible. The silicon-based granites, who could survive in the heart of a volcano, said the radiation would shatter their crystalline ships. Hope seemed lost until a small cough echoed through the chamber. All eyes turned to the human representative, Thomas Reed, who had stood up from his seat in the far corner. He wasn't wearing ceremonial armor or carrying ancient weapons like the others. His simple blue uniform looked plain and unimpressive. "Earth would like to volunteer for the rescue mission," he said quietly. Laughter erupted across the chamber. The Krell warrior actually fell back into his seat, roaring with amusement. "The humans, the ones who run from every fight. The species that puts warning labels on their coffee. The same ones who wear armor to ride their primitive 2-wheeled vehicles." Another representative called out, "Who put railings on every high place." Thomas Reed waited patiently for the laughter to die down. "Yes," he said simply. "Those humans. We have a ship in range, the Prudence, commanded by Captain James Miller. We believe we can attempt the rescue." "You believe?" Thorm leaned forward, his crystalline form catching the light. "Explain." "We've been developing experimental radiation shielding," Reed explained. "It's not perfect, but combined with proper safety protocols and careful planning, we think we can reach the colony." More laughter rippled through the chamber. "Safety protocols," a Vex warrior sneered. "In the face of such danger, you speak of safety." "Yes," Reed replied calmly. "Because we want to save those colonists, not die trying to reach them." The chamber grew quiet. Thorm studied the human representative carefully. "You understand the radiation levels will be beyond anything your species has encountered." "We do." "And you still volunteer." "We do." Thorm looked around the chamber. No other representatives stood up. The mighty warrior races remained silent, some looking away in shame, others still smirking at the humans' foolishness. "Very well," Thorm declared. "The rescue mission is assigned to the humans. May whatever gods you believe in have mercy on your souls." As the chamber emptied, Thomas Reed pulled out his communicator. "Captain Miller, it's a go. Start your preparations." He paused, listening. Yes, they laughed. They always laugh. Another pause. "No, sir. I don't think they understand yet. But they will." The display above still showed the massive solar storm approaching Haven 2. In 48 hours, either 15,000 colonists would die, or humanity would prove that sometimes what looks like cowardice to the galaxy might just be the highest form of courage. Captain James Miller stood on the bridge of the Prudence, watching his crew prepare for the rescue mission. Unlike the sleek warships of other species, the Prudence looked bulky and ungraceful. Extra shielding covered every surface, and backup systems made the ship look like it had grown extra parts. "Final systems check," Miller called out. Mary, how's our shielding? Engineer Mary Thompson looked up from her station, dark circles under her eyes from working through the night. Triple layered and holding, Captain. We've installed the experimental radiation shields around the cargo bay. They're not pretty, but they'll help keep the colonists safe during transport. Looks don't matter if it keeps people alive, Miller replied. He turned to his first officer. Robert, what's our status on the safety protocols? Robert Hayes held up a tablet showing a long checklist. We've run through everything 3 times, Captain. Emergency suits are ready for every crew member, plus extras for the colonists. Backup life support is charged. We've got enough radiation meds to treat a small army. Through the view screen, Miller could see 3 alien warships watching them. The vessels belonged to the warrior races who had refused the mission. Their crews had stayed to witness what they assumed would be a spectacular failure. Captain, the communications officer called out. The Krell battleship is hailing us. Miller nodded. Put them through. The fierce face of the Krell commander appeared on screen. Human, we are watching you waste time with your endless preparations while the storm grows stronger. Why not just fly in and get it done? Because, Commander, Miller replied calmly, we plan to come back alive. With the colonists. The Krell commander laughed. You humans and your obsession with safety. In the time you've spent checking your backup systems, a proper warrior ship could have already reached the colony. And died in the attempt, Miller said, which wouldn't help anyone. After ending the transmission, Miller turned to his crew. Everyone, listen up. The other species think we're cowards because we take precautions. They think we're weak because we plan ahead. But I want you to remember something. Courage isn't about rushing in blindly. It's about knowing the dangers and moving forward anyway. The bridge crew nodded. They'd all volunteered for this mission, knowing the risks. Each of them wore the standard Earth Fleet uniform, with its dozen safety features that alien species mocked. Each had memorized emergency procedures that warrior races considered unnecessary. Final preparations, Miller ordered. Mary, start cycling the shield harmonics like we planned. Robert, begin the emergency system warm-ups. We go in slow and careful. As the crew worked, their movements were precise and methodical. Through the view screen, they could see the massive solar storm growing. Angry red and orange tendrils of plasma reached out like hungry fingers into space. Message from Haven 2, the communications officer reported. They're asking why we're taking so long. The colony leader says any warrior worth their salt would have started the rescue by now. Miller smiled slightly. Send them this response. Because we intend to succeed. The Prudence moved forward slowly, its ungainly form a stark contrast to the sleek warships watching them. Every few minutes, another safety check was completed. Another backup system was verified. Another emergency protocol was confirmed. We're ready, Captain, Robert reported finally. All systems checked and double-checked. Emergency procedures confirmed. Rescue pods prepped. Very well. Miller sat in his command chair, buckling the safety harness that other species found amusing. Take us in, Helm. Nice and easy. Remember your training, remember your procedures, and remember why we're here. We're not here to prove we're brave. We're here to save lives. The Prudence moved forward into the growing storm, its extra shielding already beginning to glow from the radiation. Behind them, the warrior ships watched, waiting for the humans to fail or flee. They would be disappointed on both counts. The first wave of radiation hit the Prudence like an ocean breaking against a cliff. Warning lights flashed across every console, but the ship held steady. Captain Miller watched as his crew responded exactly as they had practiced. No panic, no hesitation. Shield status, he called out. Outer layer at 82% and holding, Mary reported from engineering. Her fingers flew across the controls, adjusting power levels. The extra shielding is working better than expected, but this is just the beginning. Through the reinforced view screen, the storm looked like hell itself had broken loose in space. Massive waves of plasma rolled and twisted, while radiation levels climbed higher than any human ship had ever faced. The colonial world of Haven 2 was barely visible through the chaos, a dim shape behind a curtain of fire. "Message from the Krull ships," the communications officer announced. "They're falling back to a safer distance. They say we're insane to keep going forward." Miller nodded. "Send no reply." "Robert, what do the sensors show?" First Officer Hayes studied his readings with intense focus. "It's worse than we thought, Captain. The storm's intensity has doubled in the last hour. The colony's outer shields have already failed. Their inner shields won't last another 6 hours." The crew fell silent. They had planned for bad conditions, but this was beyond their worst predictions. Even with all their preparations, the odds of survival were dropping by the minute. "Captain," Mary called from engineering, her voice tight with concern. "I've been running new calculations. With these radiation levels, even our reinforced shields might not hold for a full evacuation." Miller stood from his chair and looked at each crew member in turn. "I know what you're thinking. The warriors watching us would turn back now. They'd say we've proven our point just by getting this far. That no one would blame us for retreating." He paused. "But there are 15,000 people counting on us. So I'm going to ask each of you, do we continue?" "The backup systems are all green," Robert replied first. "We planned for this. We trained for this." "Engineering's ready," Mary added. "We might not be warriors, but we're not quitters either." One by one, each crew member voiced their support, not with battle cries or proud boasts, but with quiet determination. "Very well," Miller said. "Mary, divert power from non-essential systems to the shields. Robert, start mapping a safe approach vector. Everyone else, double-check your radiation suits. If the shields fail, those suits become our last line of defense." The Prudence pushed forward, deeper into the storm. The ship's hull creaked under the strain, but the reinforcements held. Every few minutes, another automated safety system activated, compensating for the increasing danger. "Colony Control is hailing us," the communications officer reported. "They're surprised we're still coming. Their own sensors show that the radiation would kill most species instantly." "Tell them to start preparing their people for evacuation," Miller ordered. "We'll need them ready to move as soon as we arrive. Every minute we spend in this storm increases the risk." Suddenly, a massive solar flare erupted directly in their path. The energy readings went off the scale. "Evasive action," Miller commanded, but Robert was already moving before the words left his mouth. The Prudence turned slowly, its bulky frame preventing the kind of agile maneuvers that warrior ships were known for. But they had planned for this too. The ship's course followed a carefully plotted path, using the minimum movement needed to avoid destruction. "Outer shield layer failing," Mary reported calmly. "Switching to backups. Second layer holding at 60%. Through the storm's fury, Haven 2 grew larger in their view. They could see the colony now, its failing shields flickering like a candle in the wind. "We're going to make it," Miller said quietly. "Not because we're brave, not because we're warriors, but because we planned, we prepared, and we refused to give up." The Prudence pressed on, carrying its crew of cowards toward their date with destiny. The Prudence hung in space near Haven 2's main docking port, its reinforced hull glowing red from the radiation. Inside the colony's control room, Leader Dux watched the human ship with a mixture of disbelief and frustration. "What do you mean they won't dock?" he demanded, his translator barely keeping up with his agitation. "They came all this way just to hover there." The human voice came through the communication system, steady and calm. "This is Captain Miller. Your main docking port's radiation shielding is compromised. If we dock there, we'll expose both our ships to lethal radiation. We need to do this differently." Dux slammed his hand on the console. "We have 15,000 people here. We don't have time for human caution." "With respect, sir," Miller replied. Caution is exactly what's keeping us alive right now. We have a plan, but you need to trust us." Before Dux could argue further, a new alarm blared through the colony. 3 more shield generators failed, leaving only the inner defenses. "Fine," Dux growled. "What's your plan?" On the Prudence, Miller nodded to his crew. "Mary, deploy the emergency docking tubes. Robert, begin the evacuation sequence we practiced." Instead of using the main dock, the Prudence extended multiple smaller, heavily shielded tubes. Each one could only handle a few people at a time, but they were far safer than the colony's damaged main port. "We'll evacuate in groups of 20, Miller explained to Dux. "Children and medical emergencies first. Each group needs to wear the radiation suits we're sending over. No exceptions." The colony's leaders watched in disbelief as the human crew began their methodical evacuation. Where other species would have rushed to get everyone aboard as quickly as possible, the humans insisted on checking each suit, verifying each seal, and monitoring radiation levels for every group. "This is taking too long," Dux complained after the first 100 colonists were aboard. "The storm is getting worse. Would you rather we work faster and lose people?" Robert asked while checking another suit seal. "Every life matters. We do this right, or we don't do it at all." The evacuation continued, minute by precious minute. The Prudence's crew worked tirelessly, their movements precise and practiced. Every colonist was scanned for radiation exposure, given protective medication, and safely secured in shielded compartments. Then the worst happened. A massive solar flare struck the colony's shields directly. "Inner shields failing," Dux shouted. "We have minutes at most." Miller's voice remained steady. "Mary, deploy the emergency shield generators. Robert, begin Phase 2. The Prudence launched what looked like small satellites around the colony. Each one generated a weak shield field, but together they created a patchwork of protection. "That won't hold for long," Dux said, watching the readings. "It doesn't need to," Miller replied. "It just needs to hold long enough. Keep evacuating." As if to mock their efforts, another solar flare struck. One of the emergency generators failed, creating a gap in the shield coverage. "Captain," Mary called from engineering, "we're reaching critical radiation levels in sections 3 through 7. We need to pull back." Miller looked at the crew manifest. They had rescued nearly 12,000 colonists, but 3,000 remained. The warrior races would have retreated now, claiming they had saved the majority. "We're not leaving anyone behind," Miller said firmly. "Mary, reroute power from life support to the shields. We can run on emergency oxygen for the next hour. Robert, tell the medical bay to prepare for radiation exposure cases. We're seeing this through." The crew responded without hesitation. They had planned for this scenario, practiced it, prepared for it. While warrior races relied on courage and strength, humans relied on preparation and determination. "Why?" Dux asked quietly, watching the humans work. "Why take such risks while being so careful at the same time?" "Because," Miller answered, helping another group of colonists into radiation suits, "being careful doesn't mean being cowardly. It means making sure everyone goes home alive." The storm raged on, but the Prudence stood its ground, its human crew proving that true courage sometimes looked like caution. Red emergency lights flashed throughout the Prudence as another shield generator failed. Captain Miller stood at his post, watching as radiation levels climbed past what any human ship had ever survived. They had 3,000 colonists left to evacuate, and time was running out. "Status report," he called out, his voice steady despite the chaos. "Main shields at 15% and falling," Mary reported from engineering. Her hands never stopped moving across the controls, constantly adjusting power levels. "The backup generators can't take much more of this. We've got maybe 20 minutes before total failure." Robert looked up from his station, his face grim. "Captain, the colony's inner shields just collapsed. They're completely exposed now." Through the view screen, They could see Haven 2 being battered by the solar storm. The emergency shield generators they had deployed were the only thing standing between the remaining colonists and certain death. Message from the Krull ships, the communications officer announced. They say we've done enough. That no one would blame us for pulling out now. Miller watched as another group of colonists made their way through the emergency docking tubes. Each person wore a radiation suit, each suit carefully checked, even now. Even with death breathing down their necks, the human crew refused to rush safety protocols. Tell the Krell, Miller said, that humans don't measure success by how many we leave behind. Suddenly, a massive solar flare, bigger than any they had seen, erupted from the storm. The Prudence shuddered as the energy wave hit them. Multiple system failures. Mary shouted. We're losing power to sections 4 through 8. Emergency generators activating, but they won't last long. Captain, Robert added, radiation levels in the evacuation tubes are rising. We can't guarantee safe passage anymore. Miller looked at his crew. They were tired, scared, but still at their posts, still following procedures, still checking every safety measure. Options, he asked. We could try to extend our main shield around the colony, Mary suggested. It would leave us exposed, but it might buy the colonists enough time to evacuate. The radiation would fry our systems in minutes, Robert warned. We'd be dead in the water. Miller nodded. How many backup systems do we have left? 3, Mary answered. But they're not designed for this kind of strain. Captain, Leader Dux's voice came through the comm system. My people, we were wrong about humans. We thought your caution was weakness. But now I understand. You're not cowards. You're the bravest species we've ever met. Save the praise, Miller replied. We're not done yet. He turned to his crew. Mary, reroute all power from non-essential systems to the shields. Robert, begin emergency evacuation protocol Delta. Delta protocol. Robert asked, surprised. But that's the one we hoped we'd never need. Miller finished. Yes, begin now. The crew moved with practiced precision, even though they had only drilled this protocol in simulations. The Prudence's remaining power was diverted to create a narrow, heavily shielded corridor between the ship and the colony. It would only last minutes, but minutes were all they needed. All colonists prepare for emergency transit, Miller announced. This will be fast, but we're not skipping safety checks. Everyone wears a suit. Everyone gets checked. No exceptions. As the last of the backup systems strained under the load, the human crew worked methodically through their emergency procedures. Where other species would have thrown caution to the winds in their final desperate effort, the humans maintained their discipline. Shield corridor stable, Mary reported. But we got less than 10 minutes before total system failure. Miller watched as the evacuation continued, each colonist still being checked, each safety measure still being followed. Some would call it madness to maintain such caution in the face of imminent death. But this was humanity's way. We're not dying here, Miller said quietly. And neither are they. Not today. Not on our watch. The storm raged on, but humanity's most derided trait, their obsession with safety, was about to prove itself their greatest strength. The Prudence's emergency corridor glowed like a bridge of light between the ship and Haven 2. Inside, Captain Miller watched the evacuation timer counting down. 8 minutes until total shield failure. 2,000 colonists still waiting. Mary, he called to engineering. How are we holding up? Final backup system is at critical levels, she replied, her voice strained but professional. The radiation is eating through our shields faster than predicted. We might not have 8 minutes. Through the view screen, they could see the warrior ships watching from a safe distance. The Krell, the Vex, and others who had called humans cowards, now witnesses to what real courage looked like. Captain, Robert reported, the radiation suits for the colonists. We're running low. We have about 500 left. Miller nodded grimly. Start bringing my crew's personal suits to the evacuation point. We'll give them to the colonists. Sir, Robert protested, without those suits, if our shields fail. Then we'd better not let them fail, Miller replied calmly. Keep checking each suit seal. Keep following procedures. We don't cut corners, not even now. The crew moved with practiced efficiency, even as they handed over their own safety equipment. Each colonist was still carefully checked, each suit seal still verified. Where warrior races would have simply thrown people into ships and hoped for the best, the humans maintained their methodical approach. Suddenly, a series of explosions rocked the Prudence. Multiple hull breaches, Mary shouted. The radiation is burning through our outer plating. Seal off affected sections, Miller ordered. Reroute remaining power to maintain the evacuation corridor. The ship groaned under the strain. Warning lights flashed across every console as systems began to fail one by one. The crew worked steadily, their training holding even as death itself knocked at their door. Message from the Krell flagship, the communications officer announced. They're offering to help. They say they've never seen such bravery. Tell them to stay back, Miller replied. Their ships aren't equipped for this. They'd just be killing themselves. 5 minutes left. 1,000 colonists to go. The Prudence's hull temperature was reaching critical levels. Captain, Mary called out, the shield corridor is starting to collapse. We can't maintain it much longer. Miller looked at his crew, then at the remaining colonists streaming through the corridor. Each one wore a radiation suit that might have saved a crew member's life. Each one was still being checked, still being protected by human safety protocols. Divert life support power to the shields, he ordered. We can survive on emergency oxygen for 10 minutes. Sir, Robert said quietly, we won't survive 10 minutes if the shields fail. Then we'd better not fail. The crew worked in their slowly dying ship, the air growing thin, the radiation alarms screaming. But still they checked each suit. Still they verified each seal. Still they followed their procedures. 3 minutes left. 500 colonists remaining. The warrior ships watched in awe as the human vessel, now glowing red-hot from radiation, refused to break. They had expected the humans to run when things got hard. Instead, they watched as these cowards risked everything to save others, all while maintaining their careful, methodical approach. Final group entering the corridor, Robert reported, his voice weak from the thin air. 2 minutes until shield failure. Hold position, Miller ordered. Keep the corridor stable. Keep checking those suits. One by one, the last colonists made it aboard. The Prudence's systems were failing. Its crew was running out of air, but their discipline never wavered. As the final colonist stepped aboard, Miller allowed himself a small smile. Get us out of here, Helm. Nice and steady. No need to rush now. The Prudence turned slowly, its engines straining, its crew nearly suffocating. But they had done it, not with warrior courage or reckless bravery, but with planning, preparation, and unwavering dedication to protecting every single life. They had shown the galaxy the true face of courage, and it looked nothing like what anyone had expected. The great hall of the Galactic Council was silent as Captain James Miller stood at the podium. His uniform was still scorched from radiation burns, but he stood tall. Behind him, the crew of the Prudence lined up in their simple blue uniforms, looking oddly plain among the armored warriors filling the chamber. Council Speaker Thorm's crystalline form gleamed as he addressed the assembly. We are here to recognize the human rescue of Haven 2 Colony. 15,000 lives saved. No casualties. No losses. He paused, his next words carefully chosen. A feat that our greatest warrior races deemed impossible. The Krell commander who had mocked the humans days earlier stood up. I must speak, he announced. His warrior pride was evident in his stance, but there was something new in his voice. Respect. We called these humans cowards, the Krell said. We laughed at their endless safety protocols, their backup systems, their constant checking and rechecking. He turned to face Miller. We were wrong. While we spoke of glory and bravery, they showed us what true courage looks like. Miller glanced at his crew, remembering how they had given up their own radiation suits to save more colonists, how they had maintained their careful procedures even while suffocating, how not a single safety check had been skipped, even at the end. The humans succeeded, Thorm continued, not despite their caution, but because of it. There, what did you call it, Captain Miller? Safety protocols. Miller replied simply. Yes, their safety protocols saved lives that warrior courage would have lost. Thorm's crystalline form shifted, creating patterns of light. The Council has made a decision. All species will be required to study human safety procedures. All rescue operations will follow human protocols. Murmurs filled the chamber. The warrior races shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Leader Dux of Haven 2 stood up next. My people are alive because humans valued safety over glory, he said. They gave up their own protection to save my people, yet never stopped checking suit seals. They were suffocating, yet still followed their procedures. This is not cowardice. This is the highest form of bravery. Miller stepped forward to speak. The chamber fell silent again. We're not warriors, he said simply. We're not fearless. We're just humans. We wear safety helmets on our bikes. We put rails on high places. We check our equipment, then check it again. He looked around the chamber. Because every life matters. Because going home alive matters more than looking brave. Engineer Mary Thompson stepped forward, holding up a damaged radiation suit. This suit saved 3 colonists. It worked because we checked it, maintained it, and knew exactly what it could handle. That's not cowardice. That's responsibility. First Officer Robert Hayes added, our ship survived because we planned for everything that could go wrong. We had backups for our backups. The warriors laughed at that, but we're all still here. The Vex commander, known for leading suicide charges, rose slowly. We must learn from this. Courage is not just about facing death. Sometimes, it is about taking every possible precaution to preserve life. Thorm raised his crystalline arms. Let this day mark a change in how we see courage. The humans have taught us that caution and bravery are not opposites. They are partners. As the council session ended, Miller and his crew walked past the warrior races they had once been mocked by. Now those same warriors bowed their heads in respect, not because the humans had proven themselves brave in battle, but because they had shown that true courage often wore a safety helmet. Captain, Mary said as they headed back to their ship, they're starting to understand. Miller nodded, already checking his tablet for their next mission's safety procedures. Yes, they are. But we're not changing our ways. Of course not, Robert agreed with a smile. We're human. We take precautions. We follow procedures. We keep people safe. And that, Miller said, is something to be proud of.